Welcome to the Massachusetts General Hospital Frontal Temporal Disorders Unit Community Forum Friday. My name is Katie Brandt, and I'm the Director of Caregiver Support Services and Public Relations for the MGH FTD unit, and your host for today's session. Today, we welcome Lisa Radin, the author of What If It's Not Alzheimer's, for a conversation today. Lisa Radin was a caregiver for her husband, Neil. After his death, she began working for the Alzheimer's Association Delaware Valley chapter in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Although her main responsibility was as a special events coordinator, Lisa facilitated 2 frontal temporal degeneration, FTD, support groups and fielded FTD calls on their contact center helpline. For a number of years, Lisa had been on the planning committee for a number of FTD conferences. Lisa is a founding member of the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration and was a board member for 8 years. Since moving to Las Vegas, Lisa started and co-facilitates an FTD PPA support group. Along with her son, Gary, Lisa conceived and edited the first book ever dedicated to providing information and support to FTD caregivers. What If It's Not Alzheimer's? A Caregiver's Guide to Dementia. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you for having me come today or be able to speak with everybody today and share my story.
Yeah, and I think that that's what's so important is that you are a force in the FTD community. You're an advocate, a volunteer, a professional, but it started with the love story. And you know, it's, I think, what inspired the production of this wonderful book that we're going to talk about today. But I would love to start by just allowing you to share your story so that our community can connect with the heart of how you became connected with all of us.
I'd love to share my story. And my story is about crisis, courage, and resolve. And, you know, I'm so glad that I'm able to share my story because my story is like many of yours. However, one of the reasons I like to share my story is the fact that I'm here as living proof that we go through this journey and yet here I am, I survived. And I want to share that with you because it's really so important. Really, over 25 years ago, my world came to a screeching halt. And my children and I were really in crisis. And we were feeling, we had fear, we had uncertainty, and almost hopelessness when we first heard about the diagnosis that my husband had. What we needed, though, was knowledge. And that was very difficult 25 years ago. There was not a lot of information available and very few resources. So what I want to share with you and part of my talk is how I came to terms with what we were up against and how did I find the courage to go through the journey that my children and I went through. It was our determination and our intention to champion this situation and find some control, which was very difficult in the beginning. So my story begins when we talk about my husband, and you can go to the next slide. But it starts like so many other stories of other people that have dealt with and gone on the journey of FTD. But my husband was a loving father, a caring family man. He really was a great dad, a supportive husband, and we had a great life. We really enjoyed our life. And he was, before his illness, he was an executive. He was a motivational speaker. And we worked together for 30 years. So it was strange for me to see when I started seeing changes in him because everything was going along so nicely and enjoying. And you can go to the next slide. You can see all kinds of pictures of our children and myself and my in-laws. And we just had, we were enjoying the fruits of our efforts. and having a good life together. But in 1995, things started to change. My husband was diagnosed with, well, I'll go into more detail, but technically it was CBD, cortical basal degeneration, and he died in 1998. Next slide. The signs of change for us was, I noticed in 1995 that there was a personality change. He became, for an outgoing person who was a motivational speaker, he became withdrawn. He was less motivated. And having a position that he did for a number of years, his position was eliminated. And he started looking for employment, and he was having difficulty. For someone who could make a room, just walk into a room and have it light up, he was really having difficulty working with other people and making things happen. So what happened next was our diagnosis. You can go to the next slide. The diagnosis itself was difficult. We weren't sure what was going on. I thought it was like midlife crisis. I thought he was depressed. I thought maybe he was hard of hearing because he wasn't participating. He used to be the life of the party, and he would just sit there, very nonchalant, not paying attention what was going on around him. So he finally agreed to go to his family doctor, and the doctor thought he was depressed, so sent us to a social worker. And this person was going to do some counseling with my husband. He was a geriatric specialist. And as we started this process, my husband's speech started to slur. So at that point, I knew, this is not something psychological. This has to be doing something neurological. So we referred to a neurologist. And we lived in a very small town on the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border. And we went to someone in that area, and he went through some testing. He did clinical testing. He did MRI. And before we walked out the door, the first visit, the doctor said to me, the neurologist said, "I think I know what it is." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, I think it's Pick's disease." Well, back in 1995, everything was called Pick's disease rather than what we have now is the different syndromes under FTD. And so after the MRI, after the psychological testing, everything was conclusive that my husband did have Pick's disease. And I never heard of it. I didn't know what he was talking about. So we were really in crisis at that point because we had no idea. But one thing I have to say is that we were fortunate than many people. As I know, many of you know that someone with FTD can go through several years from doctor to doctor trying to get a diagnosis. And it's so frustrating because no one could zone in on what the problem was. We were fortunate in one way because the neurologist that we went to see had a friend who had FTD. So he knew all the signs. And that's why when we walked out the door, before we walked out the door, he said to me, "I think I know what it is." And he was right on. So now what do we have now in our crisis? What was the disease? We had no concept of what it was. There was a little bit of information when I searched for it. NIH had a fact sheet. The Alzheimer's Association had a little bit of information, but not very much. So it was difficult to understand what was going on and what was going to happen, what was the future. But I did understand that it was terminal, that I was told, and that there was no cure. So what do we do now? My children and I, my son was 24, my daughter was 26 at the time. How do we take care of my husband, their dad? What can we expect? And none of us really had any answers, but we started searching. And we had challenges. We had challenges financially. We had challenges on care support. We had challenges on resources. What was the future for us? We were frightened. We were fear. It was the fear of the unknown. And, you know, the old saying that we all do is, why us? Why did this happen to us? And what are we going to do about it? We had concerns about the physical environment. I lived quite a distance from my children. I lived in, as I say, in Massachusetts, and my children both lived in Philadelphia. And how was I going to do this alone? I didn't know many people in that area. So the decision was that my husband and I would move. We moved to Philadelphia area so that we would have the support of both our children. And then it was, okay, we have to find a place to live. I asked questions, and one of the things that I was concerned about, you know, was the environment that we lived in. I asked, you know, would this have a problem with his gait, with his movement? And they said, oh, no, don't worry about that. So we moved and bought a condominium that had 2 floors, and the bedrooms were on the 2nd floor. Thought that was fine. Later on, as I talk about the progress, it was not fine. It put us in an even worse situation that we had before. So when we talked about, you know, the crisis, what was the progression of care that was expected, and what would be next? So as we moved to our new home, there became other challenges. And I'm going to go to the next slide. And what was the resolve? What could we do? We could either crumble or we could fight. And our decision as a family was to accept what is and to determine that we were going to fight. We were going to do everything possible that we could to make this situation the best possible situation out of a bad situation. So we chose and we determined to be an advocate for his care. We took a deep breath, worked as a family, and we just moved ahead. We took it day by day. The living arrangements eventually became a problem, but we took it day by day. We managed to have, with our medical needs and daily care, what we did was we got a team of doctors together when we moved to Philadelphia area. We met with a neurologist, and we met with a psychiatrist. We met with a social worker. We met with a physiatrist. We met with a lot of different medical professionals to see how we could care for my husband. And what we did is we had a team. We created a team. We had one doctor, the neurologist, who was the point person, so that I wasn't running from doctor to doctor trying to figure out, what do I do next? What's happening here? What's happening there? Everything was funneled through the neurologist, so that it made life a little bit easier to be able to handle what was going to be happening. In working with a physiatrist, for those who are familiar with it, he's a doctor of rehabilitation medicine. And we decided that we would use all the therapies possible. We used a physical therapist. We used an occupational therapist. We work with a speech therapist for helping with swallowing later on. And since my husband's, as I mentioned, his speech started to slur, we wanted to be able to have him be more comfortable with speaking. So we actually had some speech therapy that went along with it. But everything, you know, the occupational therapist came to the house, analyzed our situation, made sure that the house was safe for my husband's needs. And the physical therapist had challenges as the disease progressed. My husband had problems with walking. And she was able to give us exercises and be able to keep him mobile as much as possible. And we were concerned about exercise and nutrition. So we had him walking. We made sure that he was eating properly. Although, as many of you know, people with FTD do have a gluttonous period where they do eat everything in sight. So it was important that we made sure that he was, eating properly, that he also had mental and environmental stimulus to keep his mind as active as possible. We would take him, he loved music. So we'd go to as many concerts as we could find in our area. And to the point where even later on in the disease, when he could no longer walk and ended up in a wheelchair, we would take him in the wheelchair. And he would go to see live concerts to keep him active. And just to see the smile on his face when he was able to enjoy the music that he loved was worth every effort that it took to get him where we were going. The other thing that we did was to make sure that in the beginning that he had something to do. So although he wasn't able to work anymore, I was able to make arrangements with the hospital near us that he could volunteer and do some volunteer work to his capability. They were very aware of his situation. They were very aware of the diagnosis. And he was able to, in the beginning, go to the different rooms and deliver mail or deliver flowers. When that became more difficult, he was able to put the badges together. So he was sitting, someone was watching him, being there to supervise, and he was able to put the name tags together. And he did that for a while. Just on a funny note or humorous note, one day I did get a call from them and they said, "Lisa, I'm sorry, we can't have meal worker anymore." And I said, "What is the problem?" He was going into the cafeteria and he was taking food. They just, he had money in his pocket, but there was no concept that he should pay for it. So he was just going in anytime he felt like he wanted something, that he would go in and take an ice cream, take a candy bar. So that had to end. So then it was, okay, what do we do next? The next thing we did was a daycare situation from, again, socialization. So he went, the thought of a 57-year-old man, in a daycare situation is hard to accept. But again, we had to accept what was there. And when he went, we spoke to the people there, and they had him working with them. They had him helping other patients, other families that were there. He helped with the serving of lunch, whatever he could do. It made him feel like he was going to work rather than to a daycare situation. And it allowed him to socialize. When it got to the point where he needed more medical attention, because as his disease progressed, what I didn't know at the time was CBD affects your gait and it affects your mobility. So it got to the point where my husband was wheelchair bound and eventually lost his speech early on, although he could understand for quite a while. But he was not able to have the mobility. So other things popped in. He couldn't go to the daycare as it was because he needed more supervision. We needed to change our arrangements at home because, again, our bedrooms were on the second floor. So what do we do next? Spoke to an occupational therapist, and we put in a stair glider so that we could sit him on the chair, glide up the stairs, and I had a wheelchair at the top of the stairs so that he could get into the bedroom. This worked right up till basically almost to the end. However, there were times because of our situation, I had to move him because there was a level where the stairs turned and there was like a sort of level area. And I had to have two stair gliders, one to go to the first level where the area was, and then get him up, switch him into the second one. And there were sometimes I thought, oh my God, we're going to fall down these flight of stairs and both of us are going to get hurt. But again, with the resolve, we just made it happen. We got him to be able to, again, be mobile, be able to at the extent that he could, go upstairs to his bed, have downstairs, because I didn't want the whole house to turn into a hospital room. I still had my son lived with me and helped me, and I wanted him to be able to have some space. So we did what we had to do and continued. One other point I want to mention about when I said my husband lost his speech early, he was able to understand, and I had researched on the internet at the time to see what kind of a device. There were not, the types of devices that we have today that people could use. But I found someone in England a gentleman who had cerebral palsy, and he had developed what he called a light writer that he could use. And my husband still remembered how to type. So he was able to type in what he wanted to tell us, press a button, and it would repeat what he typed in a man's voice. So it gave us about 6 months of real communications, even though he couldn't speak. But he was part of what we were doing all the time. And there were days where he would just sit in his wheelchair and type in what he wanted to tell us. And again, be part of all of our conversations. So as heartbreaking as it was, it still gave us a part of him to be part of us all the time during that period of time. After about 6 months, he was no longer able to type, so that situation ended. But as you can see, we never gave up. We always tried to find out, and we tried to be ahead of the curve, what would be the next step. And after the daycare, we went to the medical daycare, where he had more supervision. He was able to, he was in his wheelchair. They picked him up. They had a van pick him up and take him to the facility. And that lasted a period of time till, again, it became more difficult to take him to the bathroom, to work with him on a basis such as eating. So we had to end up in that situation, and he did spend the rest of his time home. But next slide. The courage that it takes for each and every one of us to go along this journey is just amazing. And it's amazing how we find, again, the resolve in ourselves to be able to handle a situation as difficult as this was. We were really dedicated to his quality of life, to make each day the best day it could be. And I would wake up every morning when I took my shower, and in the shower, just have a mantra. Let's today be the best day it can be, because that was so important to me in keeping him home and having a quality of life. The other thing that's important for us as caregivers is our respite. It's important for us to take breaks, to get support from others. And, I was a person that thought I could do it all. It was very hard for me to ask for help. But I found as the journey continued, I had to ask for help. It was not something that I could do on my own. And whether it be, professional help, family, friends, you can't be afraid to ask for the help. A lot of times people mean well and they say, well, let me know what I can do. A suggestion I have is have a list of things that you could need help with. It could be food shopping. It could be helping go to the doctor's office, whatever it is, have a list. So if someone really says to you, what can I do to help? Instead of saying, well, let me see, you have a list that that you can go to and say, you know what, this is what I could need help with. I have a doctor's appointment. I need someone to be with my husband or my wife or my sister, or whoever it is in your family that you're caring for, so that I can make this doctor's appointment. Also, who supports us? Our friends and our family. However, I'm sure many of you found, as I did, that you can't count on everybody. There are those who mean well, but can't handle the situation, don't want to be part of the situation, whatever it is. I understood that and I accepted that. yet I had other people that were with me straight through the end, through the journey. But I have to say that I can think of one person who was a very good friend of my husband's, and he disappeared. He disappeared from our lives. And when my husband passed away and he was at the funeral, he came up to me and apologized. And he said to me, "It's not that I didn't want to help. I just couldn't handle it." And I understood. Everybody handles things differently. So, but do take help from people who are willing to help you. And I was committed to keep him home. There is fact that, and my brother even said to me, "Why are you keeping it home? Why are you keeping him home? Why don't you put him in a facility?" And that was not my choice. And each one of us has to make a choice. And no one can tell you what is the choice for you. You have to weigh out what works for you. Sometimes, and I've met people who have been in my support group who put their loved one in a facility. And part of it was because they lashed out. There was danger. And if there's a problem where you're fearful, then yes, that's a situation that, definitely needs to be looked into. But you have to make that decision. It's very, very personal, and it's not for everyone. Doing what we can under the circumstances, that's important. And making decisions, family decisions, working together. If there's other people that you share your information with, so that you feel that you're making the best possible decision at the time. There's also, part of courage is your end of life choices. Those are difficult. My husband did have a living will. He had his decisions of what he wanted, but that's difficult. We need to be compassionate, and we have to honor the quality of life that a person wants. So that's important when making end of life choices. The other part was important for me was to have an autopsy. I wanted to be sure that we knew what was going on. I wanted to make sure that I knew as much information for my children as possible. So it was our decision to have an autopsy. Now, for me, it was difficult. My religion did not look at autopsies kindly. You were not supposed to tamper with the body. But after having a discussion with the neurologist, having a discussion with the doctor who I wanted to have do the autopsy, he made me feel very comfortable that the body is tampered with, but no one would ever know. It's a small incision in the brain, and no one would even know that anything took place. So I agreed upon it. And that's which was really important, because remember I said in the beginning that they said my husband had Pick's disease? Well, when we got the autopsy, that's when I found out that he had CBD. I had, again, never heard of it, didn't know what it was, but when I read about it, he had all the classical signs. So again, it was important. It was not something that he did not have a hereditary condition. It was sporadic, which was, again, comfort for me to know that I didn't have to really worry about my children, and that they didn't have to worry that they had a gene that might cause them to have the disease. So on the way, all the choices that we make are difficult, but it's important to take one day at a time. It's important of doing the best you can do, and be realistic. Forgive yourself, because we aren't perfect. We're going to make mistakes. There are days where I know I got really frustrated, and I remember one time just losing my cool and yelling at my husband, and he started to cry, and I just crumbled. I just felt so badly. So know, though, that we are doing the best we can do under the circumstances. Next slide. So life goes on. Our challenges of care and how we looked ahead. Surely there were struggles, getting the diagnosis, coming to terms with what we had to deal with. the physical and the care needs that are part of what we do, the financial and legal assistance that we needed. When my husband, towards the end of his disease, we were really tapped out. We had all our finances were gone. And I really didn't know what to do. And my son decided, who was, both my children were such a support for me, but my son decided he was going to send out an email to everybody that we knew to tell them about our circumstances. And I was absolutely mortified. It was like, no, you can't do that. This is something we have to do. It's no one else's business. And he convinced me to let people know what was going on in our lives. And in a matter of a week, we had $15,000 that helped pay for his final expenses, keeping him home. So you just never know. People are generous. People want to help. They don't know how to help. And sometimes we have to, again, accept what's there and just make every effort to make a day a good day. So as far as caregivers and caring for ourselves, again, a very, very important part of caring for a loved one. Because if we don't care for ourselves, who's going to care for them if something happens to us? It's so important that the care of the caregiver goes on. My children are wonderful about that. Every once in a while, they'd give me a respite. They would, my daughter took me away for a spa weekend just to get away and be able to relax. And my son took care of his dad. So you need that time. You need that time to rev up your engine, to keep yourself going. And it's okay to do that. It's okay to take that respite. It's okay to take that weekend away. I know a lot of people in my support groups have used facilities for a day or for a weekend just to be able to get away and have some normalcy to their life. But these are challenges that became a drive for me to do something meaningful. And I'm going to ask for the next slide. And after my husband passed away, I thought to myself, what can I do? Where can I take all my energy? What can I do to maybe help somebody else? And that's where the book came about. I spoke to a neurologist my husband's a neurologist, who I was very friendly with. And I said, what if we do a book? There's nothing there. There was nothing for people to read or to get information. And my son and I put a syllabus together. We sent it to the neurologist. He looked at it, gave us some suggestions. And we did not write the book. We edited it. We actually took our experience, questions that we wanted to know, areas of expertise we needed help with. And we went to approximately 20 different experts in different fields and asked them if they would write a chapter so that we could make somebody else's journey maybe a little bit easier than ours was. And so that knowledge is important. And our first book was originally published in 2003. It's the third edition. I'm hoping there's going to be a fourth edition. We're trying to see if the publisher is interested, because there's more information in certain areas of the book that after 7 years, it's approximately 7 years now since the last edition, new things that have come to the forefront for FTD. And as we look back on our experience and ask the questions, we wanted to save all of you maybe time in learning what to do or how to take care of a loved one, and to feel that the journey that we went through, could help other people. The book itself, which I know Katie has, but the book itself has 4 sections. And the first part is the medical focus, talks about the disease itself or the different syndromes of FTD. Second talks about managing care. The third part is caregivers resources. And the fourth part is caring for yourself. Again, a very important part of caregiving. This book is not a book to be read from cover to cover. It's a reference book. So if you have a question when you're have a family member and a situation comes up, maybe it's on swallowing, then you can look up that under the occupational therapist or the speech therapist rather, and look up about swallowing. It talks about what can you do if you need if the liquid is too thin and they're having difficult swallowing. There are products in the market that you can buy today to thicken a drink, to make it easier so that they're not aspirating or choking on the liquid. So this book is for reference. It's, again, not to be read from cover to cover, but when you need a specific topic or specific information, questions that you have, that's when it's time to pick up the book and look at it. It is available on Amazon for those people that would like to get it. And I believe it also is on a digital format now. But what we wanted you to get out of the book is, my son and I, we wanted you to be empowered, to have less fear when you have information, so that when you have knowledge is empowering, that there are different ways to make a difference, even small ways to make a difference each day. Not to feel isolated, that there are others going through what you're going through, and know that life goes on. You know, we made it through. It was difficult for me. It was not a long journey. It was my husband's descent was very, very rapid. It was 3 years, but it still was a difficult journey, and we made it through. We really have, as individuals, we have more strength and courage than we realize. We rise to the occasion when we need to. So, in closing, you want to find your voice and embrace the new normal, because this will be the new normal for you for a period of time. No one knows how long. So it's finding a way to cope with your day-to-day activities, with your day-to-day emotions. And one of the ways of doing that for me, and I think Katie was going to ask me that question, but I'm going to bring it up here, was a support group. The support group for me was being able to talk about what's happening to me with other people that understood what I was going through. Because the average person doesn't understand what you're going through. They don't understand what the new normal is. But when you're at a support group, you can laugh, you can cry, you can be angry, you can have all your emotions, and everyone understands and accepts it for what it is, that you're going through a journey. So, you know, a caregiver's journey is just that. It's a journey that doesn't really end, but always has a way to look forward. What can we do next? What can we make better? How can we make this situation work? There's a new normal. It's being open to life ahead and creating something new. Also, look for the strength in your relationship with others. Again, family and friends. Don't go this alone. It's something that you need to be able to have other people surround you. My hope is this, that as we all look back at this period in our lives, we can forgive ourselves for the things that we have maybe not have gone right or done right, and know that we did the best that we could under the circumstances and have no regrets. Just live your life and move forward. In ending, I want to acknowledge all of you for your courage, your love, and the support that you're giving your loved one. So thank you for listening to my story.
Lisa, that I just was feeling so emotional listening to at the end, because I think your story is what other caregivers, I think, need to hear, is that there's a way to not only survive the experience, but to thrive in it as well. that there are opportunities to find joy and feel that you've done the best you could as you went through what was difficult and often unknown. And I just want to thank you for sharing such a personal story, not only here today, but using that passion and everything that you went through to create this beautiful resource for families.
It was a labor of love.
Yeah. Yeah, you could probably say that about the experience of caregiving and the experience of writing the book.
Right.
Yeah. I really loved it how you had so many powerful words: resolve, courage, forward, future. Because so oftentimes, I think families who hear a diagnosis, right? It's a dual diagnosis. If your loved one is diagnosed with FTD, Alzheimer's, or a related condition, you're also diagnosed as a care partner, a caregiver, often at a certain point. And oftentimes, I don't think the message is as full of hope as we would like it to be. And so your words were really powerful and impacted me with how much you use that positivity to keep going.
Yeah, it's again, it's fight or flight. And in order to survive this, you can either, again, take it as this is what I'm going to do and look for the positive side of it, or feel sorry for yourself and then nothing happens. So the disease takes over. And each person has to make that choice. Am I going to, I'm going to survive this. Now, how am I going to survive it? And
right.
you've got a plan.
Yeah. You've got a plan. And you didn't choose that this disease came into your life, but you can choose how you react to it.
That's absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah. I loved it how you said that no one has to read this book all at once, because I think about how our caregivers are often so tired, right? They have long days and
Absolutely.
They might think, Katie, I can't read a book this thick. I can barely watch a YouTube video at bedtime. But what's important is that you can have this on your shelf. You can pick it up and say, I have a question about engaging with physical therapists, occupational therapists. What would that look like? And find information here about whatever the topic is that you need.
Right.
So I really love that.
And I want to add one thing that I didn't say as I was talking, that when you work with these different disciplines, physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech therapist, it's important that they understand, this is a terminal disease, but it doesn't mean you can't help a person have better days or have the better days longer. So that if you're working with someone and they look at you and say, well, this is hopeless, type of a thing, then find another person for that discipline, because you need people who believe that they can make a difference. And I had that experience. I had to go through a couple of physical therapists, because they said, well, what's the sense? He's not going to walk anyway. So you need people that understand and are willing to work with you to better a situation.
And what I love about that, Lisa, is it gets to such an important value about valuing our loved ones' quality of life at every stage and respecting their personhood and their dignity at every stage, that they deserve to have the best day that they can.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Lisa, as we wrap up our time together today, I was just thinking about, what's the take-home message is that you hope caregivers will leave with after watching our session today?
Okay, I think there's one more slide.
It's one more slide.
Is there one after that? No? Okay.
No.
That's it. Okay. I thought there was one more. But what I think the important thing to take home is the fact that you do the best that you can.
Yep.
and have no regrets, because I hear so many people said, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that, I could have done this better. No, under the circumstances, we do the best that we can. And be good to yourself. Give yourself the respite that you need. Ask for the help that you need so that you're not taking this journey alone. And look forward to, better days, because they will come. And, one of the things that if you want to do something with your energy, so a lot of people I know from my own support groups, once a person, their loved one has passed away, they go on and that's it. That's closed. That's a closed chapter in their life. However, for those of you that want to do something further and make a difference, it could be, doing a support group. It could be doing some lunch and learns. It could be doing volunteering at the for FTD, AFTD. There are many things that you can do with your energy if you want to. And one of the things that, and let people know your story. So many people still have no idea what FTD is. So let people know your story. Be willing to, if you're comfortable, to talk about it to other people. And one of the things that's taking place, or took place by the time you listen to this, on March 5th, is that AFTD has made arrangements to have a special, I'm going to say webinar, with the FDA. And the purpose of that is to have people tell their stories so that when different tests come up, different situations come up that are presented to the FTD for drugs or whatever, that they have a full understanding of why these drugs are so important. So hearing our stories, and there's going to be a lot of give and take on this. I believe it will be recorded so people can hear it. But having them hear our stories, and whether it's a behavioral, whether it's a mobility issue, whether it's a speech issue, having them fully understand the scope of how FTD affects not only the caregiver, but the quality of life of the patient itself, they'll have a better understanding of why these drugs or therapies are so important. So I'm so excited about that taking place. So more people will have an understanding about FTD. But get involved if that makes you comfortable.
And if you don't live near the Association for Frontal Temporal Degeneration, AFTD, the good news is that there are so many virtual options now. Right. Just like you and I, Lisa, are connecting to bring this education and your voice to our community of FTD families. We're able to connect through technology, and those opportunities are existing now to reach out to elected officials, like you mentioned, for the FDA, for scientists and funders and drug developers. And the more that we can raise our voices and share that human experience of how it has impacted our lives, I think the more people will be able to pay attention and understand the impact.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it has been wonderful having you. And I'm just so inspired by how you took an experience of crisis and you mobilized your courage to continue your love story. I like something that you said to me during one of our meetings, where you said that people have more resilience than they know. And I would say that for sure, of the many negative surprises that FTD brought into my life, the positive one was really showing me how much strength I didn't even know I had. And I think you're a beautiful example of that as well, Lisa.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
This was wonderful. And the Massachusetts General Hospital Frontal Temporal Disorders Unit is a clinical research program dedicated to providing the highest quality of care while we work tirelessly towards a cure for these devastating conditions. Community Forum Fridays is one of the ways that we connect with our community of persons living with a diagnosis. family, care partners, and professional caregivers. We appreciate everyone who's contributed and connected with us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.